We are so glad you've joined us on another episode of The Catholic View for Women, season number 9, and we are tackling some pretty important topics, as we always do, helping you see news and views from a truly Catholic perspective. This is a big topic a lot of us can relate to because we see it all too often in the news and also in the general climate in the media. I'm Teresa Tomeo, the co-host of The Catholic View, with my stellar co-host, to my right, of course, Elena Rodriguez, and Janet Morana from Priests for Life. Ladies, this is something that we hear about it seemingly almost every day. We've had recent school shootings more and more, which is just horrible, but also other stories of just bizarre violence. We were talking before the show about a story not too long ago where a man literally took his car and drove into a restaurant and killed his daughter and daughter-in-law. Right. Where is all of this violence coming from? And every time I hear stories about violence, Janet, I think about the culture of death and this connection to abortion.
Absolutely. I mean, Father Frank always says, children will not stop killing other children until parents stop killing the children. And both Father Frank and I have studied extensively under Dr. Philip Ney. He's a Canadian psychiatrist who have studied abortion for over 4 decades. And he's shown the connection between what they call sibling survivors, the survivors of abortion. First of all, anyone born after 73 is a survivor. And think about what that does to a child. To say that I'm here not because I was welcomed, because I was lucky enough to be allowed to be born. But then when these children find out that other siblings were aborted, what does that do to their whole mental psyche? That I was chosen, I had to measure up. Why me? Why not? And then survivor guilt sets into a lot of these children. And so abortion really is the I know people like to point fingers. Why do you blame everything on abortion? Because it's the most violent act we have in our country, in the world, and over 50 million children have been lost to abortion. But what has the impact been to the mothers, to the fathers? There's men who,
of people,
who have anger because their child was aborted. I mean, there's a case of, there's a maximum security prison in Florida. Now, all these men, all male prison, they're all in for life, all right, because they've murdered people. And Rachel's Vineyard has now gone into that prison through the chaplaincy program. And do you know the atmosphere in that whole prison is changing? And when they first interviewed the first group that came to the chaplain to say, well, we want some, we'd like to get closer to God, all right? They didn't know anything, word about abortion. And the chaplain said, we just want to take a survey. Write down on a piece of paper if anyone had an abortion experience, just put yes or no. There were 12 men in the room. 10 of them had a prior abortion experience. And of course, then they started the Rachel's Vineyard program. But the anger that these men were like unpacking and relieving themselves of decades of anger of their girlfriend or their wife murdering, basically, as they put it, their child, it caused them to be in this violent nature of anger.
So what does that do in terms of Dr. Nye and the other experts with whom you've spoken over the years, for the overall mindset of the culture? Because Mother Teresa and Father Frank, our spiritual advisor, has always mentioned Mother Teresa's famous quote, and he even has a quote about the connection between abortion and violence.
Yeah, well, it's when, I think Mother Teresa said that, when a mother can kill her own child, well, there you go. I mean, that's the harm here. But the good news here about that prison, Teresa, is they have done now Rachel's Vineyard for several years, and the warden of the men who've gone through this healing program, they've noticed a total character change. Some of the biggest, hardest criminals that are there in for life, anger, have now softened. And some of these prisoners are now leading the Rachel's Vineyard program within the prison. And the warden said, well, I guess if this continues, the whole atmosphere in this prison
is going to change.
But the more important thing I say is, when is society going to wake up and look at
Exactly.
this?
That was my next question to you. How come we can't get that story of what you did in the prisons out there? Because then people could hopefully see the connection. And we're going to play this clip. I was so relieved to see the governor of Kentucky, Matt Bevin, talking about the connection between abortion and violence. And he went into this in great detail. And it wasn't even, I think it was a summit that he was having with social workers on the issue of violence. It was after the Parkland, Florida school shooting. But let's take a look at this clip from the governor of Kentucky, who's a very pro-life governor, by the way, talking about the issue of abortion as it connects to violence in our culture today.
Hi, my name is Evan Davies, and I'm just an independent consultant. I'm not affiliated with any organization. I really admire the work that you're doing to help foster children, and you've said a number of times that the children's lives is most important. We had a murder a little while ago where 17 people, including many kids, were murdered in their schools. And how do you reconcile the children's lives are most important with the comments you've made to the media about it's naive and premature to talk about gun control, and that it's culture and not guns that is causing these horrible things?
I'll tell you exactly how I reconcile that. First of all, a month ago in Kentucky, we had a very similar situation. Made a very concerted effort to make sure that we removed the media circus from the healing process. So within 24 to 48 hours, you're probably not even aware, most people aren't, that I had a 15-year-old come into a school in Kentucky last month and shoot 16 children at point-blank range, 2 of whom died. A set of twins were both shot and taken to a level 1 trauma center. They lived. This is very real to me. I've sat with these families. You also probably are not aware of the fact that I've buried my oldest child. Died under different circumstances, but went to school and didn't come home. She was 17 years old. I know exactly, not exactly, it's not possible to know exactly what another person's going through, but I know exactly what it feels like to bury your oldest child. I know what the impact is on a family. I don't come at this with a sense of sympathy, but empathy. The point that I've made that's been largely misconstrued, I'll reaffirm with you and tell you exactly why it comes from, where it comes from. This idea, just as solving this issue is able to be solved with a single law or rule or change, is naive and delusional. And so we shouldn't allow ourselves to entertain naive and delusional thoughts. It is part of a broader construct, just as this issue is. And the point that I made, that I'll reiterate, is that if we think that a part of what we are seeing is not a cultural problem, we're kidding ourselves. And the point that I've made is this. What has shifted in the last 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years? It's not the percentage of guns that we find in homes. And you can give me a statistic that there's now more guns. Fair enough, I'll submit that that may be true. I'm not going to argue with you. But the reality is there's fewer homes that have guns in them than there were 50 years ago when children didn't walk into schools and shoot themselves and shoot each other. That's a fact. You can confirm that. But I'll tell you this. When I was a kid, kids brought guns to school. Kids brought guns on the school bus. Kids brought guns to school in their own vehicles. Kids didn't shoot each other with them. So some things have not changed. What has changed? We as a culture, as a society, and it's very germane to this topic as well, we don't value human life like we did. We remove increasingly respect for the dignity of other people. You look at how rampant pornography is, the degradation and disrespect for women and for human life in general. It is so systemic. People of our age have not been exposed like our children have been. There's not a child in America that hasn't been exposed to pornography, I guarantee you, if they're above the age of 12. That's a fact. It is so systemic, it's horrific. And it desensitizes us at every turn. And so we're desensitized to the value and dignity of human life. We're desensitized through, and this is to the heart of what I said that you seem to take exception with, is that through violent video games, where literally you are encouraged, and you can roll your eyes all you want, man, but I will say this. You explain to me the value of a game that encourages somebody to go back and finish him off, where you get points for kill counts, and you slaughter people. We're desensitizing people to the value of life. And we see it through the lyrics in music, and we see it through television shows, and we see it through movies. We see it in the fact that the mores of this nation have changed. And we see it through the fact that we increasingly want to remove any sense of moral authority from everything. I'll tell you again, we could have 1,000 sidebars, and you could agree or disagree as it relates to what I'm about to say. But in a nation where over the last 40 years, we've aborted 50-something million children, and we have multiple states with medically assisted suicide being provided by doctors. At both ends of the life spectrum, we're losing the value for life that we once historically had. You can say that's good, you can say it's bad, but it's a reality. You couple that with the fact that all these other things are changing, that we're removing any sense of authority. It used to be that you had different levels of authority starting in the home itself. Only a third of children in a recent Pew study say that they have no interaction, for all intents and purposes, with their own parents. When their parents live in the home, they say their parents have no clue what they're even learning in school. There was a study recently in an article that was derived from that and other studies. It was in the Atlantic. I encourage you to look it up, about the impact. And again, you can smirk and you can smile, but as somebody who's an independent consultant, I find it remarkable that you're so smug and you're so disregarding of my opinion, when in fact I'm just trying to have an honest dialogue with you, based on a fair question. But I will say this. Look at this article in the Atlantic. This article in the Atlantic talks about how young people are increasingly becoming suicidal and depressed because of the use of social media and the use of these personal devices and on-screen time. All these are part of a cultural issue. And this cultural issue, if we're not addressing it, we are kidding ourselves, because it also affects this issue we came here to talk about today, which is why these homes are broken, why so many children are finding themselves in government care, which is not the best solution. The government should not be raising our children, period. It just shouldn't. The fact of the matter is, we need people in the position like I am. And I had this same conversation less than an hour ago with the President of the United States. And I said to him, he should, I should. This whole room was full of cabinet secretaries and governors of other states. Those of us that are in a position of influence and the ability to say something, shame on us if we don't step up and call people to a higher authority. And there will always be those, including many in the media, whoever the messenger is, they're going to find the imperfection in that messenger. So if the messenger says we should do X, Y, Z as it relates to this issue or adoption and foster care, people will say, well, who is this person? They're an imperfect person. Well, so is every one of us. There's not a perfect person in America, but that doesn't mean we don't strive for perfection. There's not a perfectly morally upright person in America. That doesn't mean we don't espouse and aspire to reach for moral higher authority and expect more and demand more of our children. Shame on us if we don't sound the alarm. You want to take any kind of morality and change the mores of a nation, remove any sense of higher responsibility, try to pin it on any one thing and assume the government and a piece of regulation and a rule is the solution, and then we're shocked when these things happen, we're kidding ourselves.
Stay with us. We'll continue this important discussion right after the break on The Catholic View. Welcome back to The Catholic View for Women. I'm Teresa Tomeo, along with Elena Rodriguez and Janet Morana, my co-hosts, and we're talking about such an important topic. And the Church has such wisdom on this as well, in terms of life and the culture of death and the many issues. So we're giving you a Catholic response to violence in our culture because of all, and we've seen violence for a long time in the media, and that's a whole other thing we're going to talk about. But right now, because of the rash of violent acts we've seen within the past year, really, even before we started taping this series, and even things going on right now while this series is airing, over and over and over again, we see violence. And Janet, if we could only get people to understand the connection between the culture of death,
That's right,
in terms of abortion and contraception, to what's happening in our culture. How do we help people, do you think, understand the connection?
Well, you know, what was interesting, if you talk about the connection, look at that clip. Do you see how those media people that were there and how the governor had to address them and say, stop snickering, stop criticizing?
You can roll your eyes all you want.
Roll your eyes all you want, because that's the response we get from the other side out there. They don't want to hear it. It's almost like they put their fingers in their ears and go, no, 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 no. But the facts are clear. I spoke about the prison. I mean, that's just one example of the violence. And, you know, unless we're willing, you know, right away, every time these gun things happen, right away, it's the whole attack on the Second Amendment, take away guns from good citizens. And when you look at it, Teresa, I mean, a lot of these shootings were prevented from getting worse because good citizens had guns at those situations and stopped the person.
And were able to act immediately.
But as far as getting the message out there, I think we have to start talking among the people we know. You know, like I just gave some great examples, and I think our viewers have to start talking about this among their church friends and family.
And Janet, I want to ask you, based on your experience with all the people you have in Silent No More, we have spoken with, men and women both, do people who have been hurt by abortion, are they always aware that the consequences they are living today are because of that abortion? Is it always easy to easy to verbalize that?
No, not necessarily. And the case of those prisoners was a perfect example, because they were coming for like a spiritual exercise. You know, they weren't thinking about abortion, but the chaplain just brought it up as a topic and said, you know, anyone who's had an experience, just mark it down for me. But then when they started to delve into that and gave them a chance to share, these men were crying and sobbing about this child. And some of them, it happened 20 years ago. But the anger that built up in them, for no one recognizing the fact that I couldn't stop to save my own child, they became then violent, violent criminals. You know?
Our spiritual advisor, Father Frank, gave us some great insights on this topic, Janet, picking up on your comments regarding the connection between abortion, the culture of death, and our violent culture out there. He says that the tendency to violent behavior on the part of these young people, and again, picking up on the research with Dr. Ney, the lives, basically, they don't think that they're that important. They say, well, lives are disposable, lives are worthless, because the lives of their classmates don't matter, because the lives of babies don't matter. One anecdote Father says he came across was a teen arrested for a violent stabbing, and he said to the judge, you kill them in the womb, we kill them in the streets. What's the difference?
Right.
Wow.
And that is the point, you know. And then, of course, you know, Teresa, another obvious connection is the violence, you know, that we let in the media, that we let our children see constantly. I mean, and now it's not just, it's TV, it's the movies, but it's their devices.
Everything is on the phone.
Everyone, they're on their phones, and they're on all kinds of violent games. They play violent video games. So they're like just absorbed and immersed in a lot of violence.
Without any filter, without any clear distinction, especially at that age, which is a crucial age in formation of the human being. At that age, there's no filter, there's no defense. So there's no real conception of what is real and what is just on my screen, what is allowed on my screen, what is not allowed outside in real life. And it's desensitized completely. So who defends our children? Well, who steps in to defend our children?
And abortion is the dehumanization of the unborn child, right? But also then the abortion doctor dehumanizes himself, and then the anger, of course, like we were saying, of the men. It's all this stuff that spirals down.
And then you see this constant, whether it's abortion or whether it's expressed in another way, it's easy to kill somebody, as we heard that quote from Father Frank and Dr. Ney. I think what's important is for parents to understand, as you pointed out, it's everywhere now. It used to be where when I wrote my first book, Noise, which is going to be one of our resources when you give the homework later on, when I wrote that book, I remember thinking about Columbine, because I covered Columbine as a secular reporter, and I remember hearing statements from the police and the sheriffs saying that the two gunmen that were the teenage gunmen, they were experts in the one-on-one, first-person, shoot-'em-up video game violence, the types of video games that were direct one-on-one combat type situations. They were expert shot, basically, what do you call it? Expert marksmen, basically.
Well, that's what the games do.
Because they constantly were playing these video games. And now it's so much easier. That was 1999. That was almost what, well, just over 21 years ago, right, that happened, or 19 years ago. And you think about that, and you think about how we've, if you want to say it, advanced in terms of technology, if we can call it that, about how easily accessible this stuff is. And this is what I tell people. It used to be where the American Academy of Pediatrics would say, if you have children, you need to take the TV out of the bedroom and keep it in an essential area of the home. Fine. But now, who really sits in front of a TV anymore? Everybody's on their iPads or laptops, and all these young kids have these advanced iPhones where they get the whole world, or smartphones where they get the whole world, including the entire media world, on their phone.
And the graphics, they're so real. So again, that helps in confusing that distinction between reality and the screen. And then it's at all times of night, at all times of day. So then we have other problems, like you have covered in your book before, Noise, about how children are not getting enough sleep, and all the consequences that are coming from this, and how when we don't, all of us, even adults, when we don't get enough sleep, we become more prone to act violently to a situation in life that is disproportionate.
So it's compounded, but I think it starts really with the devaluing of life, as the governor said in Kentucky.
And I actually, you know, when I heard that that thing from the governor, it was so happy for him to bring up abortion, because for us who are enmeshed in it all the time, Father Frank and I, we see the clear connection. People like Dr. Ney and Dr. Teresa Burke, who founded Rachel's Vineyard, you know, the people who on the pro-life side have studied this for decades, we see it so clearly. But then when a secular politician can then utter it, I'm like, bravo, finally, he said it. You know, he's saying it, making those connections. So I think we have to discuss this more to get it out there, because we're not going to see it on CNN.
Right.
They're not going to report about it. I don't even think Fox News will. EWTN does, thank God. You know, and they have the EWTN Nightly News, of course, and the Pro-Life Weekly News. But we ourselves, when these incidents happen, right away, it's an attack on the Second Amendment, as you know, Teresa. Off to the races we go. We have to open our mouths and say, did you ever see the connection between abortion and violence?
And the same media and many in Hollywood are standing up, quote unquote, against gun violence, and they have private bodyguards that carry guns.
That's right.
And they make money off of movies that have all this presence of violence and rape and pornography, violent porn involving a lot of women who are being abused, or especially guns.
Right.
Guns sell in terms of movies. I just saw an interview with an actor on that, but if you don't have guns and violence in a movie, forget about it. It's not going to do well at the box office. So what does that tell you? We're being fed this stuff, devaluing life.
That's right. You know, and of course, you know, the other point I like is when President Trump, every time one of these events happen, of course, the Second Amendment gets attacked. But then what he said recently was, this is a mental health issue. And I was very happy to see that, because it is really a mental health issue. If you look at the profiles of all the gunmen who've done all the violence in the past, like, decade, and you look at their problems, research, they've all had some sort of mental illness or a problem. And so the question was, well, why were they able to get a gun? And why were they able to buy all these guns? You know.
And over again, and we were talking even about one of the shootings in Texas, the school shooting, where too, just as in the Parkland case in Florida, the gunman, information about him was out there in terms of his anger and his frustration all over Facebook, posting certain things.
there,
So sometimes I think we look elsewhere for blame when we really have to look inward, starting with how do we value or devalue life?
That's right.
And just one very quick point about the value of confession as a healing sacrament for all of us in any degree in which we may find ourselves of mental health or mental sickness. The value of going to confession, making use of the sacraments for that daily healing, not letting
the family
build up.
that prays together stays together.
Right.
Okay, and I think it's time, Teresa, for homework. All right, well, of course, you just mentioned, Teresa, noise, which is the #1 suggestion, to read noise, which is available at the EWTN Religious Catalog. Our next suggestion, #2, is have at least one sit-down family meal every single day. Now, in this busy culture, that is a miraculous thing to try to do, but really, it's a challenge.
But that FaceTime is very important.
And also, too, put the devices, check them to the side, have no devices at the table. #2, have each of your children share at table. What made you smile today? And what might you be angry about? Talk to your children more. So that's a good homework item there. #3, household chores. Assign kids more time helping family and growing in responsibility. Less time for the devices and the electronics. And #4, monitor what your children are viewing on all the electronic devices, and many of them have where you can lock them out of certain things, and you should. #5, of course, is go to our website, thecatholicviewforwomen.com, for more information. Up on our website, we will have this homework assignments will be repeated there, lots of websites for you to go to. And of course, prior episodes are also up there after they've aired a couple of times. And of course, #6, like us on Facebook and keep track of, I know, Teresa, your travel schedule is up on our website and mine, and of course, your blogs and so on. And we want to hear from our viewers, don't we, of comments
and I
on the programming.
think the discussion really, don't be afraid to talk about it with your family in terms of the connection between abortion, the culture of death, and what we're seeing out there in responding to our violent culture. The church has the answer for everything, and this area is no exception, of course. Great discussion, and really encourage you. Also, your Priests for Life page, priestsforlife.org, has so much information on this, on the fallout. And your book, Shockwaves, too, because this is connected. We should add that to the homework list. This is connected. All of it. You can't go around attacking the human person and not expect to have some sort of a major fallout. That's what we're seeing. Great discussion, ladies. Thank you so much. On behalf of Janet Morana and Elena Rodriguez, I'm Teresa Tomeo. Thanks so much for tuning in to The Catholic View for Women. And don't forget, we'll have all of that information that Janet spoke of in terms of the great homework suggestions on our website at thecatholicviewforwomen.com. We'll see you next time on The Catholic View.